In the history of humanity, only one man was born intentionally to die, and he spent all of his earthly days carrying the burden of his certain death around with him. These are the steps that our God took. It's known as the descent of Christ. And so in Philippians 2, 5 through 8, we're going to look at this. It says, adopt the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus, who, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. Instead, he emptied himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity. And when he had come as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on the cross. So now the shift comes from a humility inside of the church to the humiliation of Christ. This passage is most often referred to when attempting to grasp this deep, profound mystery of who Jesus is. It's also, by the way, the source of controversy and the source of heresy. That's why this passage is so important for us to understand. It is unique amongst all religions. It is unique in everything else. In all of these other religions, you have different stories of deities and divinities, but in the Christian narrative alone, do we have a God who would descend, come down as a person, and live and die so that the creation that rejected him might be redeemed through him? And so I'm going to walk through. There's 7 steps that are laid out in this passage, 7 steps that form this theological concept of the humiliation of Christ. So here's the first one. He says, existing in the form of God. This already blows my mind when I think about this. He existed in the form of God. He was fully God. There was no part of Jesus that was not God. He was all-powerful. He was infinite. He didn't experience suffering or hunger or physical pain or that feeling in the pit of your stomach when you're like walking towards somebody and you see them and you make eye contact and you both step to the same side to avoid walking each other and you're just like, that was embarrassing, and then you both step to the other side and it's even worse and you just want to like go on with your day. Yeah, he decided to endure all of that. Also, I think the crucifixion sucked, but you get the idea. So he existed as God in this perfect realm, free of all suffering and pain and everything. And it says that he decided to make a choice. Not only did he have all those things, but he stood in perfect unity with the Father. He had access to the triune nature of God, and he gave all of that up to inherit these bodies. So he was fully God. That is very important to understand. He did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. That's the second step. He created us in his own image, but he was fully aware of the limitations that our form presented. So he knew that he could break the rules. He knew that he could adopt a form that had abilities that you and I don't have. But because he wrote the rules, he also knew that if he broke those rules and created a body that was somehow different, it would have tainted the effectiveness of a life and death on a cross, because only a human death could stand in the gap for a human salvation. So he acquiesced. So he said, I'm going to do this. And so the next thing, it says, instead, he emptied himself. And this is where the process starts to get complicated. But he gave up some of his divine aspects. So he was both fully God, and that never changed. But as he emptied himself, he gave up some of these things. One was his divine glory. He concealed and veiled it in his humanity. We know that God's glory was immense. There's this wonderful passage where Moses goes up onto a mountain and encounters the presence of the literal God. And it says when he came down, his radiance, God's radiance had seeped into Moses, and his radiance was reflected in Moses' face, so much so he had to wear a veil to conceal himself because God's radiance, his ambient radiance, was so much that people couldn't endure it. You've got the story of Elijah, who is hunted by the royal family, and he goes in this cave, and God says he's going to pass by, and this earthquake and a fire come, and then this like rushing wind with shattered boulders, and then God passed in this small whisper. God's glory was immense. Humanity could not bear it. So Christ emptied himself of the divine glory, and it did come seeping through the cracks in some moments. In the transfiguration, at his baptism, there were moments where people recognized that although he was a man, that there must have been something divine about him. Perhaps the greatest proclamation was the soldier. It says, surely he was the Son of God. So although he emptied himself of his divine glory, it was still evident. He also gave up his independent divine authority, which means that he submitted himself to the will of the Father, where previously they had been in complete harmony with their decision-making. He said, God, not my will, but yours be done. And so ultimately, he submitted himself to God. He also gave up the voluntary exercises of some of his divine attributes. Christ the man was not omniscient. He was not omnipotent. He was not omnipresent, and he was not omnitemporal. So our human brains can't comprehend the vast majesty and the knowledge and the power of who God is. And so, although while he was still fully God, he forego some of those things in order to inhabit a human body. Jesus actually didn't always know what was coming next, and he existed at a certain point and a place in time. Now, he knew things about his future, and he tried to give hints to his disciples who never seemed to pick up on them. But nevertheless, he gave up some of those things. He also gave up some of his eternal riches. Think about it. Jesus lived in heaven. He was surrounded by the worship of angels all the time. And he came down to a world where people got angry with him. They mocked him. They spit on him. They chased him out, and they hated him. He willingly endured the hatred of the world. And he did that because he loves us. He also gave up his unique relationship with the Father. I think the most heartbreaking thing that Jesus ever uttered was, my God, why have you forsaken me? He said that up on the cross because in that moment, he became the embodiment of sin, and God can have nothing to do with sin. So he gave up this unique, intense relationship with God the Father. So the next thing is that he, assuming the form of a servant. This term means bondservant, meaning that he owed nothing, and he owned nothing and owed everything. This is the lowest of the low. This is another thing that blows my mind about the story of Jesus, is that he could have come in as a king. He easily could have. They were anticipating a warrior king. That's what they were longing for. He could have come in as a conquering king, not having to endure any of this, and he could have taken over the whole world. He could have been a warrior Messiah who could have reigned with earthly power and prestige, but instead, he came humbly as a blue-collar worker. That's who Jesus was. When people looked at him, they thought, surely nothing good can come of Nazareth. Nobody of any repute can come out of this worthless place. So it's not just that he came as a human. He came as a form of a servant. It says that he, taking on the likeness of humanity, he had the full appearance of a man. In fact, I don't know if you know this, the Bible actually goes one step forward, and it doesn't exactly call him ugly, but it doesn't not call him ugly. This is what it says in Isaiah 53, verses 2 through 3. He grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He didn't have an impressive form or majesty that we should look at him, no appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of suffering who knew what sickness was. He was like someone people turned away from. He was despised, and we didn't value him. It's a serious Bible diss when it says he didn't have an impressive form, right? It was like, he was okay. He was like a good 6. But he came in. He was also like a man well acquainted with suffering. When people looked at him, they saw that he carried the burdens of the world on his shoulder. So again, it's not just that he came in as a man, it's that he came in as the lowest form. And he did this all out of humility. And then it says, and when he had come as a man, he humbled himself by being obedient. He had the power of God in him, and yet he restrained his usage of those godly powers. I don't know if you guys are fans of superheroes at all, but there's been an interesting shift. If you just look at the narrative of how we construct superhero narratives now, every modern take on superheroes seems to believe that if you got power, you wouldn't become an inherently good person saving people, that instead that power would actually corrupt and make you more like a villain. I think there's something, I think that rings true for a lot of people. I could never imagine going through a fraction of what Jesus went and willingly endured, knowing that I had the power to stop it. I just wouldn't. I get angry when I stub my toe, right? And Jesus, he went through all of this, and it says not only did he humble himself, it says that he, to the point of death, even on a cross. To hang on a tree was considered a curse. It wasn't just a form of execution, it was a form of horrific torture. In the history of humanity, only one man was born intentionally to die, and he spent all of his earthly days carrying the burden of his certain death around with him. These are the steps that our God took. This was the step that God saw was necessary in order to redeem creation. This is the method by which mankind was saved from itself. From birth to death, Christ's life was lived in humility. He descended down from heaven into this, and all because he considered it worthwhile to save the least of us. The reason it's so important to understand this, to fully grasp the utter majesty of God, is that we first have to come to terms with what he's done. So said another way, it's not until we see the height that Christ fell from that we can fully appreciate the depths that he was willing to go to save our worthless souls. He came down from heaven, and he came down to live as one of us, and he did it out of love. That just blows my mind. There's a great quote by C.S. Lewis. He's describing the incarnation of Christ in his book, Miracles. And he says, "One may think of a diver, glancing mid-air, then gone with a splash, vanished, rushing down through green and warm water into black and cold water, down through increasing pressure into death, like the region of ooze and slime and old decay. Then up again, back to color and light, his lungs almost bursting, till suddenly he breaks surface again, holding in his hand the dripping, precious thing that he went down to recover. He and it are both colored now that they have come up into light. Down below, where it lay colorless in the dark, he lost his color too. But he goes down to come up again and bring the whole ruined world up with him." I love that. Like Christ descended down from these immense heights down into the depths. And when he did that, he brought all of us up with him.